aliens are like.
Yeah.
Oh, I miss it.
I know it got quiet now that the whining sound from Tana's office is not happening.
How far are your offices from each other?
They're stacked.
Yeah, I mean literally like 5 feet, but up. Well, diagonal because I'm on the porch.
Okay.
And we also know Tana has the higher office. She has the penthouse corner office suite.
Of course.
You have a corner. And you have more windows.
But I'm not even inside. I'm out on the porch. I don't know how that...
There are two different ways of looking at being in the corner. There's the like corner with the dunce cap, and then there's the corner penthouse. You know?
Exactly.
Are we live?
We are live. But our countdown screen kept messing up the audio every time I'd use it, so I just decided not to use it. So
it's just like blam, live.
So that being said, welcome to everyone who is here watching with us tonight. As usual, I have Tana, Dr. Tana Schiewer, and I have not Dr. Dave Capozzi.
That's right.
That's rude.
And also not funny? Dr. Don.
You're what?
I'm a master, which might be, in the scheme of things, better than doctor. No one puts Donnie in the corner.
Except Don. Well, welcome to whoever is still with us after that wonderful intro from all of us. Just real quick, if you have any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. This is always an open discussion. We enjoy the interaction from those of you that are watching. If you're watching this post the live, still feel free to throw any questions you have in the comments. We'll either answer them in future episodes or come back through and answer them on YouTube, even if you're angry and say mean things about my goatee. That being said, any questions you have, feel free to put them in the comments section, put a Q and a colon. It makes it a little easier for us to find them. And with that, so Tana, I know you and Dave had a couple back and forth via text message today about what kind of conversation we're going to have tonight. So I'm going to kick it over to one of the two of you to kind of share the topic and get us started.
Well, before we get started on the topic, I thought maybe Dave could tell us what podcast episode came out today on Dig New Streams, just so we can give a little plug for it.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Today, an interview I did with a woman that I met on TikTok named the evangelical Zennial, which just happens to describe me. I am a Zennial, right in that 1978 to 1983 range. And I would be classified as an evangelical based on, people's definitions. And so I interviewed her. We met on TikTok, and her content is satirical sometimes. Sometimes she reads old journals from when she was a very devout evangelical. And they're pretty brutal to listen to. And so I can resonate with a lot of those things. Her and I connected, so, So I interviewed her. We're going to do 2 parts because she has a lot to share. Genuinely has this kind of left a high control kind of cult experience. She came from a mega church and was a worship leader there. So it's a great conversation. Sweet. Thanks, Amanda.
That is.
What about you?
Sorry, I just have to say, I went back through and read some of my old journals, I think it was within the last year or so, from when I was at a mega church and was super evangelical. I never really liked the evangelizing part, but and I wrote this thing about listening to 2 people talking at Panera and how sad I felt for them because they didn't believe the right things or whatever. It was so cringy.
You want views on TikTok? Make that a video.
I might have to go back and find that, but Yeah, so our episode coming out tomorrow is about the parable of the lost sheep. And I re listened to it because I'm the one who does the editing. And I was like, man, there's a lot of good stuff in here. And I realize I'm biased, but I think we talk about the concept of what it means to be lost. We talk about whether it's a lost sheep or an irresponsible shepherd. We kind of relate that to the church today. And yeah, it's like some good stuff. So
Love it.
that's coming out
Love that.
tomorrow. Yeah. So
Drop it, watch it, listen. Can you watch it, or is it just a listening kind of thing?
it'll be on YouTube as well, but it's also
Sweet.
available wherever you get your podcasts.
What is happening?
You're advertising.
All right, go for it.
So the topic I had mentioned earlier was the idea of sin, because I was thinking about this today, and
You were thinking about
this is
sin
partially
today?
I was thinking, gosh, I really want to sin. What can I do? So should have just consulted you, Don.
I'm the expert.
Yes. Hey, sin boldly, man.
Expert in sin.
Expert sinner. You should put that on like your wherever your profiles are, Twitter, LinkedIn, whatever. Expert sinner. But anyway, Dave is like, I'm gonna do that. So anyway, I was thinking about it partially because I was listening to our podcast, and it was about the whole thing about, because right before the parable of the lost sheep and coin and so on is when like Jesus is dining with the sinners, and the Pharisees are like, "What the heck, man?" And I was thinking about that part of it, and sorry, I'm trying to figure out how to put all my thoughts together here. So there's a sort of gatekeeping in Christianity, right? Where it's sort of like, we're the ones who are in and you're the ones who are out. And there's these different definitions of different types of sin that designates a person as like out, right? And here we have this example in the Gospels of Jesus eating with the sinners. But I feel like what we see from a lot of, particularly evangelicals today, white evangelicals, is a sort of like, rather than reaching out, I think we disagree with some of their definitions of what a sin is and what a sinner is. But if we're accepting for a moment their definition, right? Like, they're not doing the reaching out and having a meal like Jesus, like the example of Jesus. Instead, it feels almost like they're gleefully pushing them back. And that's just something I've been thinking about, that I've been trying to sort of think through and understand, because in addition to Jesus, we have the example of Abraham, who, when God was going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, Abraham's like, wait. What if there's 50 righteous people? What if there's 40? What if there's 30? Like, Abraham goes and like pleads for Sodom and Gomorrah. So we have all these examples. I agree that the definition of sinners has drastically changed. It's, the idea is to go out and petition God on their behalf and to, love them and reach out. But now it, like I said, it's almost like a gleeful, like, God said it's okay to hate you. And I'm just trying to figure out how we got there, and also like how that's justified by the people who behave that way. I feel like I talked a lot.
No, that's good. Go ahead, Don. I know you have thoughts on this. Define sin for us, Don.
Well, first of all, before I even define sin, I want to define sinner, right? Sinner was a category of people. It wasn't people who sinned. It was people who their day-to-day life, their occupation, what they did to provide for their household was counter to Torah, right? So tax collector would have been collecting a usury, which it goes against Torah. A prostitute would have been involved with adultery, which goes against Torah. And so you have a tanner would have been handling and coming in contact with dead animals constantly, which goes against Torah. Now, none of those independently eliminate a person from being able to be a part of the faithful. It's just that it categorizes them as someone whose job is counter to the way we're called to live. And so there's nothing about those individuals that prohibits them from being in contact with someone like Jesus or the Pharisees or anyone like that. It's just an indication of who they are, right? That what their job is. It obviously, as the Pharisees who are attempting to live as clean and pure of a life as possible, begin to want to avoid being seen or present or interacting with them because they don't want to do anything to offend God. And that's a misunderstanding of what God has in mind, right? And so this is kind of where we start to see some of this picture change. And Jesus is trying to correct the picture back to what was intended with the way that these things were thought about, right? That it wasn't a sinner didn't preclude you from participating in community. A sinner didn't preclude you from being a part of the kingdom. A sinner did not preclude you from being able to be fully welcomed, loved, cared for, safe. But as people tried to move into this purity culture of that day, which is different than the purity culture that we maybe grew up with, but as the Pharisees were trying more and more to honor God, in so doing, they were diminishing or dismissing or marginalizing people. And Jesus is trying to correct this and saying that's not what should be happening here. A sinner should be welcome at your table. You should look forward to having meals with these categorized people. And if you notice in any of those stories, Jesus isn't really trying to get them to quit their jobs. Jesus isn't trying to convince them to stop being tax collectors. Even Nicodemus, when Jesus confronts Nicodemus, Jesus is mad that he is taking more than he should, not that he's a tax collector. And so all of this is just very interesting. Sinner really is, and then we've taken it and run with it, that a sinner is anyone who is not a Christian, which wouldn't have been accurate then because no one was Christians then. So I guess it would have been accurate, but not a part of the faith. But these people were part of the faith. They were Jewish. They were part of the faith. And so the sinners were people who were part of the faith. They were not Gentiles outside the faith. Jesus was having dinner and meals with Jewish people who were categorized as sinners. Is that helpful at all? I feel like I said a lot of words, but didn't necessarily communicate clearly. Poker Stiff says, today if I was having... Thank you. Today, if I was having a meal and fellowshipping with the 81% of evangelicals that voted for Cult 45, would those be sinners that should be cast out and I should not be associated with? Now, I would say, Poker Stiff, I'm sorry, Zacchaeus, not Nicodemus. You're correct. Thank you, Amanda. So, Poker Stiff, you're actually more accurate, right? That because a sinner is implied that you have taken on faithfulness, right? It's kind of this, one of the things that frustrates me with Christians talking about people outside the faith as being sinners is it's not possible for someone outside the faith to be a sinner. The reason it's not possible
Yep.
is they do not adhere to Torah. And so they don't have a law that they're breaking. And if we actually read Romans instead of just pick and choose what we want to actually pull from it, Romans, I believe in Romans 5 and 6 actually says that they were sinless because they are not under the law. And it's even somewhat of a warning to Gentiles to convert.
Yeah. Right.
Go ahead, Dave.
I remember hearing about, I forget when it was that I first heard that the word for sin, hamartia, was an archery term.
Yep.
And that made things so much clearer for me, that you're shooting for the bullseye. It means you're trying. You're trying to hit the mark. You're trying to be faithful. It's like if you were shooting, if you had a target and you were like, nah, I'm good, I'm going to shoot way over there. That's not sin. That's just like you don't even care about the rules.
That's evil.
Of this game.
No, that's evil. That's wicked.
Yeah, right.
So when the Bible talks about sinners and evil, it's differentiating between those two things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because evil or wicked implies that you know what the law is and you are thumbing your nose at it, so to speak. Yep. So Tana, where do you want to go from here?
I'm not sure. It's just something, because there are days I wake up and I just feel like everything feels hopeless. Like there's just so much anger and hatred and oppression, and most of the people doing that stuff are using the Bible as a defense for that. And I feel like I feel like I need to like talk about that and think about that, but I'm not sure what to do. And part of what I was saying earlier about how it feels like a gleeful exclusion and not just like I'm so sorry, but this is what I truly believe God said, and I respect you and whatever, but I really just believe that this is a sinful lifestyle and I'm trying to save you from it. As obnoxious as that has been for a lot of people to experience, it feels better to me anyway than the outright hatred and the like you should be wiped from the face of the earth stuff. And the reason why I'm saying it feels like gleeful to me and more like they're using the Bible to justify hatred is because I can't fathom wanting to believe in a God that would okay this stuff. And I almost feel like that was where Abraham was. It's like, wait, this isn't right. And doesn't it even say like Abraham or God tried to hide from Abraham what he was about to do?
Yeah.
Which suggests that Abraham was such a righteous person.
Actually, it doesn't even say righteous. It says just. It says that he was
just.
a just person.
Like, wouldn't that be an amazing thing to aspire to be? Like, to be so just that you could imagine that God would be like, man, I don't want to tell Dave what I'm about to do. Like, I don't know. Maybe that was just something I needed to vent about, but I feel like I'm missing something. And I guess my question is, how do we, I guess it's a kind of a question about the future of faith, which I think is an interesting question to have amongst the three of us, since I'm not sure where your thoughts are on that, Dave, and like whether you care if there's a future of the faith. But I imagine to a certain degree, since you live in this world, you do care what happens with Christianity because it affects so many things. Like, how do we course correct? How do you combat that type of thinking?
Well, first of all, you have to
Just
actually
an easy question.
Well,
you have to get people to actually read the Bible is the first thing. And neither side wants to read it.
yeah.
Fundamentalists don't want to read it. Oh, they want to read parts of it. And progressives or evangelicals have abandoned it. And so there isn't anyone reading it. And obviously that's a big statement. Of course there are people reading it, but there's fewer and fewer people who are reading it as a whole entity, as a whole body of work, as an entire library of course correction, a library of growth and evolution of thought, a library of these disparaging or disparate views that are trying to figure out how to be together in a world that is also changing.
Yeah. I'm on a little bit of a delay, so if I cut you off or anything, let me know. I have a few thoughts on this. I will say that when it comes to the Bible, people who have left evangelicalism are not in a place, for the most part, what I've observed, of being able to see it as a useful tool for faith. So there's two questions that I hear you asking, Tana. One is about Christianity, and one is about faith connected to maybe the Bible. So Christianity is a giant beast. It's very difficult to know what someone means when they say Christianity. Because if I think Christian, I typically don't have, like, say, Don in mind. Like, I'm not thinking of Don Schiewer. I'm thinking of fundamentalists. I'm thinking of evangelicals. I'm thinking of people who have inherited imperial Christianity. So it's hard for me to think that that thing, which is such a giant system in the world, would be a loss. I don't see, if Christianity crumbled, it would have massive consequences worldwide. But I would see that as justice rather than something to lament. When it comes to faith, I very much care. I care about faith. I care about what it means to pursue mercy, humility, justice. I care about that deeply. I don't necessarily read the Bible anymore, but I also have internalized so deeply the teachings that guided my life that it doesn't feel like at this point that I'm ready to dive back into something like that and to engage with it in a way that would be anything other than, triggering or re-traumatizing. I don't know. And even though I studied it in a way that was, I learned it in a way that was not so evangelical at a later point, it still doesn't, I can't do it. So I don't know if that answers anything, but I think when it comes to sin, it's not a word I think of anymore. It's not something that I worry about doing.
So it's just me. And now maybe someone else. There's Dave. There's Tana.
And
all right.
I care more about disconnecting from this than I do sinning. So that's it.
Yeah. We're going to have a deconstruction of Don's internet here pretty soon. Pokerstiff says, Tana brings up a question. If Abraham was just, which to me is no good and evil, right, wrong, and being righteous means to be striving to be holy and live rightly, which is more important to strive for?
Under what?
You're muted, Tana.
I said I feel like I'm having a difficult time separating the two words.
So righteousness would be like, I'm going to use a sports analogy. Forgive me, all of you recovering evangelicals who are tired of hearing sports analogies from pastors. I could play basketball because I know the rules and I could follow the rules well. I will never be LeBron James, who not only knows the rules, embodies the rules, and takes them to the next level. Right.
Yeah.
And I think that the difference between righteous and just is righteous means that you are innocent according to the law. Right. So for instance, maybe you've not ever had a speeding ticket, but that doesn't mean you've never sped. You're considered righteous before the law. But had you actually never sped, you would be just.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
So
then I vote for just.
Yeah, the second one, the second analogy was better than the first analogy. I just wanted to work LeBron James into this, as he's about ready to break the all-time scoring record in the NBA.
Unfortunate.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. You were cutting out. I think you're going through a tunnel.
Who holds it now?
Kareem.
I thought so. Okay.
Yeah, that's a really good thing. I mean, and at this point, depending on who you are, like, it's all a perspective thing. What do you care more about? Do you care more about not getting caught for doing something, or do you care about integrity?
Yes.
100%. That's exactly right. So when Paul says he's righteous before the law, is not actually claiming perfection.
Right. Which is why this whole works versus faith debate is the thing that it is, right?
Right. And I heard your TikTok on that, and I actually think that plays. There was a few things that were okay. I mean, you only messed up like 6 things in your 1 minute diatribe. No, actually, it was very good. I highly recommend folks check out Dave's comments on works versus faith. But it goes into that. And I think what has happened since works versus faith has become such a huge fight within modern Western Christendom that the fear of works is so great that sin has to be about spiritual disobedience as opposed to physical disobedience or physical failures. And so again, this goes back to what I was saying, last episode, and I feel like I say all the time, is that this loss of physicality of things, right? That if we were to look at works instead, is that Yahweh, unlike the Roman gods, the pantheon of the Roman gods, does not need to be titillated, does not need to be aroused, does not need to be performed for. Instead, it is just faithfulness. And you did a great job there, Dave, talking about that faithfulness was action and participation. And it's our faithfulness that is what makes us a part of the family of God, not because we aroused God in some way that God's like, all right, you're in, you're cool. I'll do what you want.
That's good. It makes me think about, I watched this, I played this video for my civics class today, a debate between, it's not a debate, it was on the Dick Cavett show where James Baldwin was debating with this Yale professor, Paul Weiss. And Paul Weiss is a rugged individualist. And James Cone has this sense of people. And he's trying to convince this guy who's like infected by this disease of whiteness that comes from this gross evangelical individualism thing. And it just resonated so much it clicked with me, I guess, when I was starting to become really discontent within evangelicalism. The first thing that made me feel discontent was we don't feel like we need each other, but we do. Like, there's something about church that is this corporate thing that no one cares about really connecting in a way that's meaningful throughout the week. It's just we come together this once a week or Bible study or whatever. And there's the faithfulness thing matters to the community. It matters how our integrity is in community, because what I do affects your life.
Yeah.
Like, and I think within Christianity, there is the removal of we're all connected. What I do affects you. What you do affects me, and our neighbors depend on our just living.
Yeah.
So it's
100%.
almost like evangelicalism is about righteousness, which is about just getting it right, just doing the right thing so you feel better. And then, faith is just more about being just and trying to do what it means to, bring shalom or wholeness to this world.
Yeah. And one of the ironies that I think exists with that mindset is that Jesus says at least 3 times between the Gospels and according to John and in the book of Revelation, Jesus says at least 3 times, you will be judged for what you have done. Talking to believers, like talking to members of the faith, Jesus says, you will be judged for what you have done. And to me, I'm just like, you're living in this way that you have all the answers correct about how to swim, but you've never dove into a pool before. And you're gonna drown. You're gonna drown. Like, yes, all the names of the techniques and all the terms and all the ways that you're supposed to move your body. But the moment you hit that ice cold water, that stuff is going to go right out the door. And what you have done is going to become obvious that what you have not done is swim before.
That's good. Preach.
Poker Stiff says or asks, if I never knew faith, never knew Jesus, would I see Don, Dave, and Tana and say, Christian, I want to be that? Or would I see the predominant white nationalist evangelical and say, Christian, I want to be that? Well, I hope that you would see. What's that?
What was the first part of the question?
If I never knew faith, never knew Jesus. Well, I think
more context clues.
Yeah, I mean, I think here's what I would say. I think what Poker Stiff is getting at, trying to read his mind a little bit here, is that are we more representative of what the Bible is calling us to? And I would like to imagine yes, but my life might need more inspected more to know for sure. But I would also say that I don't know that it would ever be called Christian. Right? Like, I think instead it would be, well, one, it probably just would have remained Judaism. And Christianity would have just remained a sect of Judaism, much like the Reformed or Orthodox or Hasidic. And Christianity would have remained some sect of it that is maybe Christian because it just means Messiah. But I think that what would be very different is the individualism that you were referring to, Dave, would be gone. Because that's one of the things. When Jesus says, do unto others what you would have them do unto you, that's considered the golden rule, right? He actually ups the bar. Do you know what the silver rule is?
I've never heard that expression, so no.
Do unto others.
Oh, it's do not do unto others.
Don't do to others what you would not have them do, which is easy, right? That's easy. Just, I mean, you could lock yourself in your house, right?
Yeah.
Right. You could. So that one allows you to live an individualistic mindset. And I think that's the gospel that is taught more often than the do. The do requires you not only to be proactive and reactive, but it also requires you to be investigative. Like, you have to know your neighbor. You have to know that what the needs are around you. Because that's what we all would want, is for others to know our needs and then be willing to care for that.
Well, it seems like you could, in some circles, still be considered righteous if you aren't taking that step, because at least you're not breaking the law. Like,
correct.
You know, you're not really doing anything beneficial either, but.
And this is where else it gets interesting for me, right? Is because people want to be like, Jesus abolished the law. Like, he fulfilled the law. So the Torah is no longer existent. But yet Jesus only makes Torah more difficult, never makes it easier.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right? Name a time Jesus makes Torah easier.
Yeah.
And
You've heard it said, but I say, this
you heard
thing.
it said, do not murder. I tell you, don't even hate someone.
Don't even hate.
Right? You heard, don't commit adultery. I say, don't even lust.
Right.
Yeah.
And by the way, that's a bad translation too. This is not about eyeballing someone. This is about coveting them in such a way that you want to consume them.
Yes.
Like, as a consumer, you want to make them yours.
Right.
Because the same exact word that's translated as lust is the same word that's... I'll tell you what, folks. I think they're back. Tana's back. Dave's back. So
landing.
You guys aren't getting away from my discussion on lust that easily. So the same word for lust is the word used when in the Torah, in the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew Torah, where it says, do not covet your neighbor's land, do not covet your neighbor's animals, do not covet your neighbor's wife. Right. So this word that is covet in that passage is the word that we translate as lust. I don't think that there was a big epidemic of Hebrew people wanting to hump their neighbor's land or their sheep. Like, this was not about sex. Like, they weren't like, oh man, look at those rolling hills. I mean, I get that the Song of Solomon might have been into that. The author of the Song of Solomon might have been into that. But Bible jokes, I got them all day. Yeah. Yep. But yeah, it's nothing, I shouldn't say nothing. It has little to do with sex. So again, another way that we have harmed people in a sin culture and a purity culture that is not actually about justice, but instead, but I would argue the idea of coveting, where you look at what your neighbor has and think that you are entitled to have land just like theirs, or you look at their wealth and their herd and say, I'm entitled to have that kind of wealth. Or you look at their spouse and say, I'm entitled to have that type of a family and household. And again, all of those are economic terms in ancient times. Mm-hmm. It's all economics.
Yeah, and I think this brings it back to that righteousness versus just conversation. Because ultimately, when you see yourself as disconnected from the community and you see your neighbor as having something that you lack, ultimately you're out for your own self-preservation at the cost of your neighbor. And from Sodom and Gomorrah to Noah's Ark to you name it, where the Hebrew prophets are coming out and talking about selling people for sandals. Everything is about economics and how we treat one another.
Yes.
And ultimately, what we have grown up thinking about when it comes to sin could not be less connected to that conversation.
100%.
It's as if they're playing two totally different games. And so that's why when we talk, I'm so glad you brought this up, Tana, because when we hear the word sin, I doubt anyone is hearing what Don just talked about.
Right.
Yeah, and that's a huge problem, because the other way of talking about sin, the other way of talking about all of this is extremely heavy burden, right? Which again just goes back to Jesus saying, "My burden is light and easy." Right? Like Jesus says, "My burden is light and easy," and then you walk into a church and leave with so much guilt piled up on your back that you can barely stand. And you read the text and you think, this is easy?
I think that's part of what really bothers me about the state of evangelicalism today. And I would say the last 20 some odd years at least, because that was my experience as well, which is it's a sin haranguing, constantly of these are all the ways you're doing things wrong. These are all the ways that you're disappointing God. And this is why you need Jesus. It's like they feel the need to like constantly remind you why you need to be saved and to avoid hell.
But think about
rather than perhaps saying, look at all this wonderful stuff. Look at how like super cool Jesus was. And don't you want to be like that and go out and help people who are suffering? Like that would be amazing.
But think about the brilliance of it. The brilliance of it is that they create a scenario in which you're not obligated to fight against systems that benefit you but oppress your neighbor. Right? Because if the church can get folks to be focused on sin, and I want to be very clear, I don't think most pastors are trying to do this. I'm saying that this has developed by people over the centuries, right? And this is where we are today. I'm not saying every pastor knows this. I would say that based on a lot of my interactions with pastors, I tend to give them a whole lot of new information that they're like, wait, what? I never heard that. And so they're just naive, is our pastors, and they're just parroting what they were taught in seminary, and their seminary is propped up upon a bunch of white scholars and theologians. That being said, the brilliance really is that if we can get you to be worried about self-improvement and be worried about your sin, you are going to contribute to the church because you want to maintain, you don't want to have another thing that you're failing God in. So you're going to financially give to the church. You're going to volunteer at the church. You're going to sacrifice for the church because the church has been then placed up on a pedestal to be the thing that is your earthly representation of God's connectedness to this world, as opposed to your neighbor or the person who is hungry or the person who is in prison, as the Bible says, is the earthly connection to the divine. And instead, then we can focus on ourselves, because the other alternative is we need to be actively pursuing justice.
Yes.
And we also have to share our wealth, and we have to share our prosperity, our privilege, our power. We have to redistribute all of those things in order to create justice, equity, and in the world. And that, my friends, is not the way of white America.
Socialism.
Well, there's a lot of conversation around that could be had, and obviously we find white evangelicals to support capitalism in a strange way, but it's also not surprising. What is Poker Stiff saying?
Too often folks go to church seeking a sanctuary, yet they leave because it is more violent, more hurtful than the outside world.
Yeah.
And Jezrich also added, I have generally read the covet section as wanting to have not something like what your neighbor has, but to have exactly the thing your neighbor does, thereby inflicting harm upon your neighbor. I would argue, Jezrich, that definition is way closer than the one that is often used on Sunday mornings. And I think
I
you would
never
have
thought of it.
you would have a biblical case for your reading of that.
The question, there's also, so go ahead, Tana. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I've never heard it put that clearly before, that like inflicting harm on your neighbor. So thank you
Next
for
week,
that.
Jezrich replacing Don on faith under deconstruction.
I think there's a conversation to be had about disparity in this, because when I have conversations with people now, where I went to seminary, there were a lot of African and Haitian immigrants, and they were often at odds with Black Americans. And a lot of it had to do with their context for growing up did not have the same kind of disparity that Black Americans experience in America. Now, Black Americans can experience this situation where they're living in what we call ghetto-like circumstances, which just means that it is nearly impossible to get out of. And 2 miles down the road, I'm living in a mansion. And so when that is your social location, then you're creating a circumstance where coveting and crime is rampant. Now what that causes is who's the sinner there, right? So who's the person that's doing the harm? There is coveting, because it's like, yeah, I want what that person has, but you've created such an enormous amount of injustice and disparity that there is a problem that goes beyond this, like, well, we're supposed to be in community together, but we're not. We're supposed to be sharing things together, and we're not. You know what I'm saying?
I cannot wait for you guys to read. A friend of mine is working on a book right now, and I had the honor of reading the first chapter of it. And it's focused on harm. And how harm is the problem. And it's so good, and I want to talk about so many of the things in this conversation about that, but I won't do that because that's not fair. But just some of the things that you guys are saying, I cannot wait. We'll have to see if we can get the book is coming up from Ken Wilson eventually, and we'll have to have him on the podcast or on this call and talk about the book.
I just want to add to what Dave said, is there's so many systemic things that have grown over time that kind of we use them to absolve ourselves of any responsibility, right?
Yes.
Like, I've seen two videos in a row from this one guy now who, like, there's like a conversation and the person's like, systemic racism doesn't exist because X, Y, Z. And then like the other person's just like, why? And then they say something and the person just keeps asking why. And then the person starts to break down like all the different things, all the different layers of things that happened to create the situation that we have today. And that's what's so insidious about systems, is that they're
redundant.
But
I'm saying they're redundant in the fact that they don't fault. Like you point out one thing and they cover it back up. Their redundancy keeps it from being broken.
Right. But we also treat them as if like they're not made by people. like that, and that's kind of the thing that I was thinking about today, with where I was saying about how there are people who I think like gleefully oppress populations and then go, God said it, I believe it, that settles it. And it's almost like, you know, when you're arguing with a company about something that went wrong and they're like, well, that's our policy. And you're like, can I talk to the person who can change the policy? Or like, you know, and it's this weird thing that we do where it's just like, oh well, humans can do nothing now, and it's an easy excuse.
Yeah, I mean, in the church they just use the term orthodoxy.
Yeah.
You know, that I believe in an orthodox faith. No, you don't. Shut the hell up. You don't believe in an orthodox faith. In about 10 minutes, I could give you about 100 orthodox views that you full out reject. So because you hold one that you perceive as orthodox, but not nearly as orthodox as you think it is, you're going to say you hold an orthodox view.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that's the other problem, Tana, to your point, is that when people point out something like, oh, I believe in an orthodox faith, is that they rarely run into someone who can actually disprove it.
True.
Right.
And so that just then builds up their confidence that they're right. Because I think most evangelicals that walk around pounding their chest when it comes to the queer community saying, well, I just hold an orthodox view of marriage.
Right.
They just don't run into anyone that actually can debate what an actual orthodox view of marriage is. And because of that, they just imagine they're right.
Mm-hmm.
What is that? The Dunning-Kruger effect or something?
Right.
Yeah.
I always want to like sick you on people, Don. Like
everyone does. The number of times I get a message that someone's like, I just had a conversation that I wish you were here. I would have loved to have seen you talk to that person.
Or you'd get tagged in Facebook comments. Be like, all right, Don.
I do get tagged in a lot of Facebook fights.
I really want you to like debate like one of those people who's always trying to debate like one of those fundamentalist Christians that's always like trying to debate atheists and stuff. Like I really want like Kirk Cameron or Ken Ham or somebody.
I'd piss off the atheist and Kirk Cameron.
Yes, you would.
I was just going to say,
yes.
Is there a more futile debate between two people that are arguing the same thing?
Exactly. They're arguing. Yeah.
Hey, take my system of certainty for your system of certainty. That gets us nowhere.
Nope.
Yeah. Yeah. So what I've been pondering a lot lately, and that all of this like conversation kind of goes to, is I just keep trying to think how can I be a mobile sanctuary, which was last week's podcast episode, where it's a teaching that our friend Sarah, who does the podcast with us, gave at our church, and I was like blown away by and have pondered ever since. And then we recorded an episode, but the audio was messed up, so then we recorded it again. So I've now heard her give this teaching like 3 times. And I just love the concept, because the idea is that we can provide safety and salvation for people, like individuals, us. And in that episode, we talk about how there's that point when Jesus is in a crowd and a woman reaches out and just like touches part of his robe and is healed. And I was just like, how amazing would that be to be such a source of healing for other people, that just your mere presence does it. Like, that's the thing I aspire to. Like, I just want to do so much better in all that. Like, there's being, you can be hospitable here and there, hospitable, not a hospital, here and there. And you can do good things here and there, but like, the concept of just being a vessel of safety and healing and love, and like, I love that so much. And imagine if every Sunday all of those sermons were geared towards creating that. Like, that's what I want to see. I want to see us focused on being sources of healing and safety. That's it. I'm done.
Amen.
Do you want to give the doxology now too?
Praise God. Oh. I haven't done that in a while.
I'm done. I'm good.
Well, that's pretty good timing because we're only a few minutes till 9. So,
That was solid, Tana.
so what do we, how do we want to wrap this up? Outside of what Tana just said.
I mean, I think, it's funny because you attract this audience is quite diverse. So like in terms of thought, but the consistency is that everyone wants what would probably be a more consistently biblical version of what faith and justice means.
Yeah.
And so this, conversation is an invitation to more, I guess, questions. Because what I'm wondering about is how does what Tana just sort of described look? And also this reminder that you can do both. You can both care for yourself in just ways and care for your neighbor in equally just ways. And I think that one often gets neglected for the other. So that's where my head has been these days.
Absolutely.
Yeah, 100%.
One of my favorite philosophers is Soren Kierkegaard, and he has this great line, and I'm going to use the line differently than he meant it, but he has this great line where he says, when someone asks him about the resurrection of Jesus, and he says, if Jesus is God incarnate, then it's not impressive he was able to overcome death. However, it is impressive that we were able to kill God.
Oh.
Now, the thing that that kind of connects me with this to what we were talking about tonight, the Bible is completely unimpressive because of who God is. If God is only about sin management and determining heaven or hell after this world, that's what a God can do. That's totally unimpressive. What is impressive is that this God gives the power to humans to perform justice on earth amongst each other.
Yeah.
That is powerful. That we can, as people, as humans, we can instill this picture of divine justice into the world. That's powerful. It's not powerful that God can send people to heaven or hell, which I don't buy anyhow, but that's not impressive. Of course, that would be easy. I mean, all the gods are able to do that. But not Jesus, but Yahweh and Jesus connected with God is the only God we see in the pantheon that demanded justice. And not just in the Roman pantheon and in the Greek pantheon, but throughout all of history. There were gods that were for peace, but they didn't have the overall power. The overall power was often the war god, right? That was often the god that had the most power, was the god of war.
Yeah.
And then the god of peace was the one like smacking him in the knee, being like, hey, right? But in this story, in this imagination of the world, the God over all things is absolutely hyper-focused and wants justice. And sin in the mind of that God is anything that falls short of perfect justice. That's awesome. I want to be a part of that.
Yeah.
Right? Exactly. And to me, that's what's so beautiful, right? And whether you believe that this God exists or not, the fact that this idea has permeated the world and outlasted all the war gods and outlasted all the other gods, and this one little group of people with this one idea that they had the God that was powerful over all things and was bending everything towards justice, and that's the one that prevailed. Yeah. And of course, as soon as it becomes the largest faith in the world, it turns back to a war god, because that's what empires do. And we've replaced Yahweh with Zeus.
Hey now.
So
Yeah, isn't there? That's a great one. Isn't there a verse in the Christian scriptures that says like the God of peace will crush the Satan underneath your feet? Like the God of peace will do that, not Zeus,
right.
Not the God of war. Yeah.
Yep.
That's good. Nice.
Well, folks, anything else tonight? Blessings to all of our listeners. We always appreciate all the questions. So many good, thoughtful questions and ideas.
Mm-hmm.
Amanda says she needs a treatise on Orthodox sin.
Nice. Don can write that for you.
I can just demonstrate it. I don't need to write it. Watch me. Just watch me. Hold my beer.
Hold my beer. Your bourbon.
Hold my bourbon. Yeah. No, I won't. I might let go of a beer. I'm not letting go of my bourbon.
Amen and amen.
Cold dead hands. All right. Well, friends, Dave, so grateful for you to be on here. Looking forward to, I didn't get a chance to listen to your podcast yet today, but I will definitely be listening to it as I always do.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to tomorrow. Looking forward to the ancient Jesus Future Faith episode tomorrow.
Thank you. Says, one thing I have not heard you differentiate, Don, is difference between sin, all capital, and sins. I've learned the differences, but I may have been falsely indoctrinated. Please differentiate. I'm not sure I fully understand. You mean capital sin, like bad sins, and then small sins? I'm not 100% sure, Poker Stiff, what your question is. If you want to hurry up and type it in to clarify for me, I'd be happy to give it a shot in the last moment here or two.
I need to leave, my friends. This is the delight of my Monday night. So I will see you next time.
All right,
Peace,
friend.
friends.
Bye. Thank you.
And all of a sudden, Tana got short. There we go. So, Poker Stiff, if you want to try and throw in and then she's gone. If you want to throw it in the chat, we can do it. Otherwise, we can always hit it up next Monday as well. I don't think she's coming back. I think she also said she was out. Oh, there we go. I thought maybe you weren't coming back. You were like, hey, Dave is gone. So am I. What are you eating?
Chewing gum.
Okay. Poker Stiff says sin as in inherent nature and sins as in acts. Oh, so I do not believe in original sin, nor did Judaism for the few thousand years it existed before Christianity. Original sin came from Augustine. Thank you very much, Mr. Augustine, who, well, someone else kind of mentioned it earlier, but he really ran with the idea of original sin. And then the inherent nature of us as being sinful. The Hebrew Bible is clear that before we knew good from evil, we were perfect. We were perfect in the womb. When we were born, we were perfect. Like all the language of the Hebrew Bible references this perfection that we're born into, a clean slate. Also within Judaism, the idea was if you sinned and repented, you were returned to that clean slate, which fits everything in the Bible, that if you repent, you are made righteous. But yet somehow we've been able to do some theological gymnastics to try and equate that in Christianity that holds to original sin. And by the way, I don't even think it's the majority of denominations that hold original sin. Maybe the majority of Christians in the U.S. hold it, but most denominations do not have a view of original sin. And so the idea is that if you're a Christian and you hold the idea of original sin, you sin. If you repent, you're still sinful. which is dumb and makes no freaking sense whatsoever and doesn't fit the Bible. And so this idea of original sin just is really hard to back up biblically. It's really hard to make a compelling argument unless you're willing to take a handful of verses and ignore a ton. Says, Poker Stiff says, oh, my goodness. There we go. So Christ came and died for our actions and not for the essence of missing the mark. I would argue Jesus died on the cross to fulfill Genesis 15, which was Abraham and God signing a blood path that God signed both sides of the blood path on, where God told Abraham he'd give Abraham all the descendants of the stars in the sky, the sand on the beach. If Abraham was holy, Abraham and Abraham's descendants were as holy as God was holy. God, knowing Abraham couldn't do that, Bible says, and Abraham had a dark dread fall over him and he fell asleep and sees a smoke pot and a fire, a torch pass through the blood path. So God signs both sides of the blood path, or both sides of the contract. Jesus, if indeed Jesus is God incarnate, then Jesus died for Israel missing the mark of justice that they were required to do by God. Jesus takes Israel's place. And it's because of Jesus's faithfulness to live that out perfectly, to live that out well, and to take the place of Israel, that we also can experience the safety of God by trusting in that faithfulness, that we too will have our shortcomings of pursuit of justice covered by God. That was a really tough way to try and cram all that into a couple moments, especially since there's hundreds, if not thousands of years of bad teachings on that. And maybe mine will be listed amongst the bad teachings as well. I don't know. But I'll tell you what, Poker Stiff, I'd love for you to bring that up again next time you're on. If you're on next Monday, bring it up again. And I'd love to go into it in a little bit more detail. But that's a fantastic question. I appreciate you asking it. All right. Well, Tana, do you have anything else, or?
No, that's, I got to say my piece.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for checking us out and listening. If you haven't already, please give this a like. It'll make it hit the algorithm a little bit better. So we end up getting comment or liking will help the algorithm. And we appreciate your time as always. We don't take it for granted that you give up part of your evening to hang out with us. So thank you. And I hope you have a beautiful night, and we'll see you soon. Bye. Keep waving. Keep waving. Keep waving. keep going. Keep waving.